Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 43, 44, and 45. So in order to read your favorite version, I'll ask that you just type exclamation point, or Jason, would you like to read your version first? And then I'll let you decide.
I think I'll do it later. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So folks, feel free to line up to read your favorite version of verse 43, 44, and 45. Evanique, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Let me just pull it back up. Just lost it for a second, sorry. Okay, 43. The softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world. That which is without substance can enter even where there is no space. Therefore, I know the value of non-action, teaching without words, and benefits without actions. There are few in the world who can grasp it.
Thank you, Evanique. And next I have up is David, followed by Margarita.
Okay, the Hermanold is the most yielding thing in the world, masters the hardest thing in the world. Its nothingness can penetrate even the impenetrable. That is how I know the value of non-action. But teaching without the use of words and action that is non-action, how few in the world achieve this.
Thank you, David. Margarita, and folks, feel free to type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite version if you just come in.
Okay. Kelemahan, I'm going to say in bahasa again. The meaning is similar. Kelemahan yang sempurna di dunia ini dapat menguasai benda-benda yang kuat. Kekuasaan meliputi semua, tak ada yang tidak diliputinya. Dari itu aku mengetahui betapa guna kebajikan tanpa berbuat. Memberi pelajaran tanpa berbicara, menggunakan tanpa berbuat di antara manusia di dunia ini. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, followed by Brian.
Right? The 43rd verse, right?
That's correct, 43.
Okay. The softest of all things overrides the hardest of all things. That without substance enters where there is no space. Hence, I know the value of non-action. Teaching without words, performing without actions, few of the world can grasp it. But the master's way, rare indeed are those who obtain the bounty of this world.
Thank you, Laura. What version is that?
I'm sorry, that's Dyer.
That's Dyer's, okay. And so we have Brian next.
Yeah, Stephen Mitchell. The
Okay.
gentlest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world. That which has no substance enters where there is no space. This shows the value of non-action. Teaching without words, performing without actions. That is the master's way.
Thank you, Penny. And if we have no one else, folks, feel free to type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite version if you just had come in. I'll read actually a version while people gather themselves. This is the Ursula Le Guin version, Water and Stone. What's softest in the world rushes and runs over what's hardest in the world. The immaterial enters the impenetrable. So I know the good in not doing, the wordless teaching, the profit in not doing. Not many people understand it. If nobody else wishes to actually share their favorite version, then I'm going to actually, Elle, go right ahead.
All right. I hope I'm sort of new to this one. I hope it hasn't been done already. One moment.
That's quite all right.
Okay, let's see, just a sec. All right. Okay, the softest in the world surpasses the hardest in the world. What has no substance can penetrate what has no opening. Thereby, I know the value of non-action, the value of teaching without words and accomplishing without action is understood by few in the world. And this is the Taoist classic by Lao Tzu. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I think that's there. Let me see if there L was. I think L was the last person. So Jason, do you want to share your screen and walk us through the translation?
Yeah, I think this one is simple. That's everyone probably got the same thing. And I just a little bit picky. So I want to make sure the words are consistent with Chinese word. So important thing is these two words called wu wei, which wu wei, I think most of people know, non-action, action without action. Okay, so that's wu wei. So you repeat twice in short verse. So basically, this one is talking about the soft can control the heart, okay, and talk about the benefit or the gain, what you can gain from wu wei, non-action. So the translation basic is pretty simple. Basic is the words softest can prevail over the words hardest. I just do it, use the softest and the hardest, because in Chinese word, they use this word, that means the most hard, the most soft. So the extremely soft can conquer the over or prevail over the hardest. That's the teaching. And the second verse is, my translation will do it as only non-being can penetrate the seamless. Okay, so basic. I think everybody do most of the same thing, but I just want to make sure it's doing as a non-being because they use two words as non. Okay, so, and then the number 3 is, therefore I know that non-action, which is wu wei, can actually gain. Okay. And the teaching without words and the gaining with non-action are real in the world. Okay, basically say that's real means, very valuable. So I like to focus on the words. This one, teaching without words. Okay, and this, I think that's the second time in Dao De Jing it show up. This word, teaching without words. Is the other one is on the chapter 2, talk about teaching without, and they all, whenever Lao Tzu talking about the teaching without the word, always associate with wu wei, with non-action. So in chapter 2, also the same way, almost the same, talk about teaching without word and non-action. So that's one way to practice non-action. So when you teach without any words, that's one way of practice non-action. So that's it for this chapter. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for that. Now, folks, line up to type by typing exclamation point in the chat to so that you are aware or to let us everybody that know what you have taken away from this particular verse. Dr. Fahad.
Oh, I don't know. I hope you guys can see me here. Well, like in actions, seems like when you deal with people, sometimes then action can be very strong. So, and I think one of the hardest thing to do, not responding sometime, is way better than responding. And that non-action, and it's like two like you can use that in two ways. Sometimes it can be a very harsh response of not responding. So yeah, I can see non-action and not doing nothing sometime can be very powerful tool.
That's really interesting. I mean, this is something that I figure that most people will take away as the idea of non-action. But if you think about the opposite of action, non-action is action, and basically it's a form of resisting of what is. And so that is actually something that, do you wish to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, you don't have anything to follow on.
Yeah.
Let me see, who would be next here? Who would like to comment next? Evanique, followed by Madeline.
I have a question for Jason. When this talks about teaching without words, and then it relates to non-action, why is it connected, I guess, is the question. Like he does it, like you said, he does it twice. Like, what's the significance is what I'm asking.
I think okay, teaching without words is one good way to show how to practice non-action, right? So let's say you are the teacher, you want to teach math. So you probably, if you have been trying to teach, let's say, algebra, okay, to the ninth graders, sometimes you just talk for hours and then they just don't get it, okay? So that's one way to teaching with too much word. But sometimes you just simply just show a simple thing and quickly make an example. Okay, that's X, you move here, then you got the result like this one. So probably quickly get it. So he is using this way to show, okay, teaching without words, just like a lot of things we managing, don't not only avoid micromanaging, you try to be hand off. Okay, this kind of management is talking about. I think that's he is talking about. That's why for 2 times talk about teaching without words, they always associate with Wu Wei. So I believe it's talking about an exact, like teaching without words. That's one case of Wu Wei. So if you look at the words, let me share the screen for a while. If you look at the words, you will see in this, especially in this chapter, you will see this word. Okay, show it twice. Even you don't know the Chinese, you can see 无为之有益. Okay, this one is 无为之益. Okay, basically they talk about the same thing. The non-action, the benefit, what you get from non-action, just like teaching without word. Okay, so that's the way it's associated. I hope I answer your question. Yeah,
So I have Madeline, followed by Laura, then Margarita.
Okay, there we go. Yes.
Hi.
Let's see. In my translation, so the line where Jason had translated it, I believe it was the 3rd line, the seamless. Can you put that up again, Jason?
okay, let me put up. Okay. Okay, this line, right? I think that's the one. This
Yes.
one, most of the translation
Yes.
are different. I talk about non-substance, and you can penetrate with non-space. I think that's the most of the translation to it. Yeah.
Yeah, mine says that without substance can enter where there is no room. And I'm wondering about the characters that you looked at and translated as the seamless. Is that the literal meaning, or is that kind of an alternate meaning for no room or no space?
Actually, I would say no room, no room is a literary translation because the first word, this one means no. Then this word actually means room. I mean room, not space. I mean your living room or hotel room. Okay, this word is used. Oh, I reverse it. Okay, this word it basically means hotel room. Okay, so that's literally in today's sense. It's a hotel room or living room or bathroom or that's the room. Okay, so basically talking about. I don't know who is in my last Saturday's meetup talking about the cooking. Okay, that's exactly the same thing. It's talking about just a little bit about cooking. The butcher, okay, the butcher he cut the ox, right, and he used the knife. He never sharpened for 19 years. Why? Because he talked about the blade is like no substance, no space, is very thin, and it goes through the joint of the ox, which has no space or very little space. So actually, it's no resistance. I think that's the idea in Taoism teaching is talking about. You find that if you make yourself as non-being, you make yourself as very small, very humble, or minimize yourself, basically you can go any place without resistance. I think that's the meaning he's talking about.
That's interesting. Actually, that was my takeaway. Laura. I need to unmute. We can come back to you if you would like. Oh, there you go. Okay, good.
I want to look at this as a slightly different way because in art, we talk about positive and negative space, okay? And negative space still has a very proud, it's important, it's not like it's unimportant space. And so when it talks a little bit action, inaction, I mean, those inaction still holds an important space, even if it's not action. It's just like negative space does. So when I see it from an artistic perspective, these things both are important and work together. They act together in their own way. It's hard to explain it if you don't know it, but let's say you have a painting, and in the painting there's trees and houses and a lawn and so forth. So in between like the tree and the house and the ground, there's the sky. But the sky is like the negative space because that's like the in-between space between the objects, let's say. The objects are the positive space and the sky becomes like the negative space. But the sky is important still and it holds a place in it. But it's not. So that's the only way I can explain the negative space. Or if I'm drawing a table and I put legs and I go to the floor, but then I see the edge of, let's say, a couch or some more important thing, then the floor becomes like the negative space between the object of the couches and the table. So, but the floor is important because that's what the table is held up on, and so is the couch. I have no idea.
So that is actually an interesting thing. That is a theme throughout the Tao as well as in previous poems or verses, I should say. And I believe I want to say verse 16 or 12 when we talk about the wheel with spokes and the importance of the absence of things. That's also a point that kind of resonates with what Laura just shared. So let me see, I have Margarita next, followed by Evanique, then Jacob, And then Madeline.
Yeah, thank you. What I reflect on reading this verse is sometimes when I teach and I have this hope over my students, I became a bit impatient. I expect them to do many things. I become controlling. So, and I realize when I start to lose myself in this learning process and just let it be as the student process, it becomes actually more helpful for our relationship. So perhaps the teacher is not really not talking, not teaching anything, but it's also about losing your own interest in learning process, and also maybe to be patient with the work and the process that this student is undergoing, including making mistakes. Sometimes you just want to fix it, but yeah, you just let it, and probably that is the best thing that we can help for other people to teach this Dao De Jing. We don't expect them to be like us, but just to let this process unveil itself for this person. And another thing actually about not doing. In psychology, there is this concept of fading. So basic fading, like everything will be away actually, just because you're not reinforcing it, you don't put attention. So even to diminish a maladaptive behavior, what actually you can do is basically don't put attention to it, don't reinforce it, and it's naturally it will disappear, like fading. Thanks.
Thank you. I actually like that a lot. The idea of not forcing the world or the student to conform to your standards, as it's almost that acts as a form of resisting of what the student actually is trying to do, which is learn in his or her own fashion. And I think that is a Taoist approach, is to let the student arrive at their own time, on their own time. So I have Margaretha, then, sorry, I just lost the Madeline. I actually have Evanique, I'm sorry, Evanique, then Madeline.
Yeah, I think actually what Margarita said actually gave me clarity. So, because I was wondering about the minimizing yourself, and then when Margarita was talking about losing yourself in the learning process, I kind of got it. It was just, and that allowing students to learn at their own pace, and I think allowing also yourself to learn at your own pace and not comparing yourself to another person or comparing yourself to a standard that is not natural for you. I think that's really important. I think too, like going through life, I think like what you said, Joe, which was not expecting the world to conform to you, but you kind of not conforming to the world, but you just allowing, like, not trying to control everything. So yeah, actually I got clarity. So I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Evanique. Madeline.
Okay. Well, two things. First, I wanted to just augment what Laura said about negative space. When you are taking drawing classes or drawing, one of the things you look at are negative shapes. So if anyone ever has the time or inclination and you are wondering what Laura was talking about, just pick a painting you like, something representational like a Rembrandt, and try drawing the things that aren't shapes. In other words, the sky around the building or the background of the wall around the head. And that thing takes on its own shape. And it's one of the most useful tools for, sort of mental tools for doing an accurate drawing, is to learn how to do that, because then you're comparing those shapes and not just what you think of as the foreground shapes. And that sort of thing happens in the sciences too, like with back in the 80s and early 90s in neuroscience, people knew what glial cells were. Those are the nurturing, supporting cells of the brain, and they were thought of as just sort of this nice thing that was there, kind of holding up the important work of the neurons. And they've turned out to be enormously complex and important in their own right. Okay, so that was one thing. The other thing is back to the word seamless and or the meaning of no room. I'm wondering if no room in the sort of literal sense of no room would mean something that is entirely a solid. So something that is entirely a solid, that which has a substance can't penetrate it, but only that without substance can penetrate it. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Jason, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, the idea of it's water. I mean,
Let
essentially,
me
what
show
I'm
the
thinking.
screen for one more time. Okay, so
Sure, please.
that's basics about the Chinese word here. If you look at this sentence, right? This first word is wu, that means not. Okay, negative. This one is also negative. This word means enter. So if you look at this word, this one means you, means being. Okay, I think that's the right translation, being, existence. Okay, non-being, that's why I translate this way. Enter, non-room. Okay, and that's why I call it the seamless. Okay, so basics, that's exactly the word by word doing. And then I think the way he writing in this way, probably important is for the match a pair. Okay, so you will sound right or feel right, and that's the way you will. If you read in Chinese, sounds convincing because it say it's pair, right? Non-being enter non-room. Okay, I think that's the way they try to the author try to lay out in the Chinese word. Only 5 characters.
Thank you, Jason. Madeline or Jacob, then followed by Douglas. Hey, Jacob.
Hello. This is possibly just a very technical remark, but it seems like it could be a little thorn in our shoe here. And this isn't a surgeon, it's more that I'm just wondering, is the translation non-action a good one? Because
No.
what seems to be being carried by that phrase is the idea not of non-action, but of something like antithetical action. For example, the teacher not talking, not speaking obviously is not a, well, I think how Jason explained it was, well, you would quickly show something to someone, and to quickly show something to someone is definitely not a non-action. So it's more like it's an action antithetical to the convention of teaching. And so what we're doing is we're conflating non-action now with antithetical action, and I think that's kind of aberrating our conversation, perhaps. So that's my contribution.
No, thank you for that. Actually, that's very interesting. And Jason actually wants to comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's okay. First, I answer in the chat. I'm going to share the translation link in the chat in a few minutes. And welcome to save it because it's ongoing work. I keep working on that. So feel free to look around. And if you have a comment, suggestion, disagree, just send a note, to me. And I really because I that's an ongoing work I'm doing. So if you see anything you see interesting or you disagree or you have a question, welcome to bring in or just send a note to me in the meetup. Okay. So to answer Jacob's comment on non-action. Okay. Yes, I agree with you. It's not a good translation. Okay. That's why I always put the Wu Wei over there. And all the 81 chapters, the whole subject, there's many things. A lot of people talk about, the Dao the Dao De Jing is talking about Dao, okay? But Dao, this word has been focused, okay, become the high, like just like the Eastern in for Muslim. It's like a high school. Confucius also talking about Dao, okay? Even you go to the Sun Tzu, okay, the military teaching, also talk about Dao. Everybody talk about Dao. So it's not about Dao. Basics, the key thing is Wu Wei, which is non-action. And I agree with you, it's not a good translation. Among and I talk about this one, he want to use another English word, which I forget because I disagree. So it's a very difficult word, but you have to, if you read all three 81 chapter, you probably will get the idea, what the Wu Wei means. So that's why I like to use the word Wu Wei instead of non-action, because any English translation, you mislead it. Some people said that's a fail, okay? That's another wrong word, but it catch some sense, but not exactly right. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Douglas.
Okay, we got to go it this way. First of all, it's about just what I did with my students, okay? Duality, okay? That's the first thing. Once we understand something's black, one's white, this way, that way, it's all duality. That's what it's basically based on. Okay, that fits right there. If you don't understand the Ching, then that's because you don't understand duality. Duality puts the whole thing together. Now, another thing that I had a lot of my students do is the comparison between the Art of War and the Tao Te Ching. And you will find commonalities in both of them. And if you haven't read the Art of War, okay, if you want to understand the Tao Te Ching, you should read both because they have a lot of comparisons in there, and you will find them both pretty much on the spot. Okay, so try that, and you can see you can put it together as a puzzle. It fits more in there.
No, I completely agree with you. The Art of War, and actually, we just did a meetup on that last week. But now you can see elements of the Tao throughout the Art of War,
Right.
especially when you're talking about the metaphor of water and being like water and being able to settle in lower lands, and the idea of being patient as well. But there's also some other things that you'll see that in reading both of these works. You'll see
you can put them together as a puzzle. I think it would fit a nice jigsaw puzzle. When you put it together, you will see a complete, type of thing. Okay, great.
Absolutely. So I have Douglas, Brian, and then Kevin.
Let's see. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I want to take a slightly different approach. Focusing on those words that Jason picked out, teaching without words. And I think that that implicit in those words is the belief from the person who's writing it. The person is talking to someone who wants to teach, someone who has the intention of teaching. So there's an intention of teaching that's being addressed here. And the question is then, how can you best teach? Or what is one way of teaching well? And one way of teaching well, or maybe the best way to teach, is without words. So the thing that immediately came to my mind, because I've done a fair amount of teaching and also working with caregiving for children. When you're talking about teaching, you're talking about a relationship between a teacher and a student, or between an adult and a child. And in my opinion, the teacher intends to teach, the student intends to learn. But what often happens, I believe, is that the teacher learns from the student. And how does the teacher learn from the student? I think in a couple ways, by watching, but also by being watched by the student. Being watched by the student and watching the student, seeing how the student performs, how the student reacts. So the student has no intention of teaching, but the student does teach because, and he teaches the teacher because the student is simply watching the teacher. And by watching the teacher learns how to teach. And so it is with the teacher. The teacher can teach the student just by watching. And this can be a kind of a wu wei. That's a non-action. You are watching. You are present. Teaching implies presence. You are present in one way or another, and you are watching. So I pick up that concept of watching because it relates back to a concept that I think was raised in an earlier verse, that a ruler rules well by watching.
Yes.
And I think a teacher teaches well by watching. And I was struck by that because I was a couple days ago, I was looking, when I last raised that issue, I referenced Horus's eye and the eye as a mythic symbol in many different contexts, as the watching eye, as an entity that gives order and harmony to a space. And I saw that again, and it was expressly intended, according to the person who was interpreting it. I saw that again in a Roman sarcophagus the other day. The sarcophagus, as they often do, had the different gods. It had Poseidon and Athena and Helios, the sun god, all these different gods. And in the middle of them, or amongst them, was the eye, simply an eye. And the eye was giving, according to this art historian, the eye was giving order to the behaviors of all of these different gods. So, that's, in some ways, that's not entirely a coherent statement, but I think that the teacher teaches by watching, simply by being present, just as the student teaches by being present. So that's it.
And there's a lot to talk about there and unpack there. It's interesting because one of the systems thinkers that we've covered here, even 52 Living Ideas, is Russell Ackoff. And he always talked about how it's actually the teachers that are the students. And the best way to learn is by teaching. So that actually teachers and professors are professional learners. They're always learning from the students themselves. But interestingly enough, I think you're referring to verse 17 in the Tao, when we were talking about the one that we were speaking about earlier. I'll just read one translation that I pulled up, is that the Jia Fu Feng, and verse 17, just one verse of it at the end, it says, when actions are performed without unnecessary speech, people say we did it. So and there, if you look across all the translations on number 17, that there you'll find something similar. But that's a really important point that you just made, because that still holds true today, where you're going to learn more from your students. And actually, I'll call out my good friend Mike and say he probably learns quite a bit from his students just watching them as well. So that's a really interesting point. Actually, Mike, do you wish to comment on that really briefly? Maybe how you learn from your students just by watching them, not necessarily by teaching them.
Yeah, well, I'm teaching mostly young people, average age between say 9 and 13, and they're both impressionable and very true in their nature of how they learn. Meaning, if they're confused about something, I think if you've been teaching long enough, you pick it up right away. So, and if you're getting through, you can tell when a young person is engaged. So I think the point of it, or at least one of the points, is how genuine is your instruction? So are you, as a teacher, are you really paying attention to the feedback you're getting from the kids? And again, this is just specific to young people with those ages. They are genuine. The kids, it's very hard for them to fake emotion. If a kid is confused, I think you should be able to see it on their face and in their action. And just by watching. So as a teacher, if I'm giving a lesson to that age group and I'm paying attention, I should be able to get back genuine feedback, if that makes sense, if I'm in tune to what I'm looking at. It's very hard for the kids to fake that. You know, when I was in college, as I got older, I started to learn to nod my head at the right time in a lecture. And that always gave the impression that I was listening to somebody. But I don't know that that's a trick that a young person has in their toolbox yet. Usually they are either in tune or not. So if you're watching, you're getting a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, thank you,
So
Mike.
if I could
Please.
just more concisely, you know, teaching implies relationship. Students teach without words. They do so unintentionally. And we can learn from that. If we want to be teachers, we can also teach just by without words, by listening to the students. The element that's missing is the common focus there in the teaching context. If you go into a classroom or something, the focus, people are focused on the same subject or object. Also, it can happen in real life that another person is focusing on something and you feel you have something to teach about that person in relationship to that thing. But maybe sometimes the best you can do is just to let them know that you're watching and you're there.
I mean, and the other idea is just leading by example is a way.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you know, that's another way of teaching someone without using words. And in fact, I would argue, and I think most people would agree, that leading by example is much more effective than actually using words. I mean, and that's what, in a way, leadership is kind of defined in the Tao a little bit earlier. You know, is all about. Very interesting, and it also kind of relates back to Margaretha's previous comments as well, as about not imposing her will on this to the student, not forcing the student to conform to what she wants, not resisting the student, but rather going with the flow. So thank you. So next up, I have great comments, guys. I have Kevin, followed by Madeline.
Thank you. Yeah, got a couple of comments. First, to follow you guys about the teaching, I would say you maybe back to 100 years ago. It's our technology in the last. It's one teacher, multiple students. It's hard. That's old traditional style. That's teaching works. Like these days, I would say really, words, no words to teach it makes sense. You don't need a teacher. YouTubers, so many media, you can learn yourself. So let's say, one to summary is a learner focus, not a teacher focus, not a teaching system focused. Anyway, my question about this, Madeline's, about Wu and you. This is if a basic cultural perspective back to Eastern culture, easily grab this concept. Basically, if in English we use make out from nothing, that's basically that kind of concept. we can from wu, nothing, we can generate something. Non-being can generate being. Being can, transferable to non-being. It's dynamic, transformable. So it's one, I recently learned 2 words to describe that. If try understand Dao is inextricable, both yin and yang. Not, let's say, either yin or yang, or neither yin and yang. That could be either way, but that's our choice. So that's when we read Dao De Jing, we switch our mind. Let's say, okay, put away what we traditional thinking, modern thinking. Let's put it everything's work together. It's oneness, not separate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I have Madeline next.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm still on that same line about no room and the seamless. And I'm glad that Jason brought up the story of Cook Ting and his expert butchering of the ox, where his knife had never dulled because he so expertly slipped it in between the bones. Now, the knife is a thing. It has a being. It has substance. And the space between the bones, let's say between the joints, there is room there. And so now I'm starting to think that this is actually, that this line has the opposite, it means the opposite of what Cook Ting is doing. When he's butchering the ox, he's taking a something with substance and inserting it into a space, into a non-substance. Whereas I think this line is saying that when there is something that is seamless or has no room, it has no space in it, it's solid matter. In other words, it's not the void, but there are no joins or outlets or anything. The only thing that can penetrate that is not more substance, but non-being. So here in the West, we might call it spirit. Or I guess paralleling the butchery example might be that the master chef might not have a very good time of it trying to dismember the ox using a knife on the bone, but something much more subtle than a knife, like vinegar that might soften and dissolve the bone, might be seen as closer to non-being or having no substance. And that would work to open up the substance and make a way of no resistance. So I know I just, it's kind of the opposite of what Jason was saying, but I like his application of it to this.
Now I really regret missing Saturday's meetup, Jason. So it's
whenever you are not there, we talk about something important.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we do it on purpose, Joe.
That's good. I appreciate that.
Let me show a little bit. I think the Madeline catch up a very subtle point, and then that's I try to not pay much. Or please, I think let me explain a little bit here. Okay, I just type this word. Okay, if you look at the Chinese word here, okay, this one is from Lao Tzu. Let me copy here and put the one. And this word, okay, is from Zhuangzi. Okay, you compare these 2 lines. Okay, in the Zhuangzi, the words called Wu Hou Ru You Jian. Okay, that's Zhuangzi on the Saturday we're talking about. Today we talk about Wu You Ru Wu Jian. Okay, Hou means sickness. Okay, so in Zhuangzi, just like Madeline said, is no sickness, which is the blade. Okay, enter the space. Okay, and then in Lao Tzu here talking about non-being, non-substance, enter the non-space. Okay, look like it's opposite, okay? But just like Kevin mentioned, it's very Eastern concept between being and the non-being. In Western concept, in general speaking, the being and the non-being is clear cut, okay? Because that's being, then non-being, okay? That's totally opposite. But in Chinese way or Eastern philosophy, it's more on the gradually change. So if you do the very small, then that's you call being or non-being. That's a very thin line here. I don't know how many of you study mechanics or engineering. That's some concept called virtual work, right? Okay, like today we talk about virtual reality. The virtual, what's the meaning of virtual? It's there, but it's not there. That's the meaning, right? So I think in here, I not explain too much, but Madeline brought up, Kevin talked about this. So that's the point, okay? Because between being and the non-being, very different from Western and the Eastern. The Eastern is a gradual change, kind of like in English word, virtual. Okay, that's the meaning, yeah.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Jason, for that explanation. Douglas, and then we're going to go to the next verse.
Some of my teachers, Alan Watts and Leo Buscayo, the love doctor, and Alan Watts, you know, everybody knows Alan Watts. Anyway, they're teachers of mine. Compared it this way for teaching, okay? You get a child or get somebody in there, and the teacher wants a flower done in a certain way, okay? So, you know, whatever, okay? Now, that other kid or other child is going to do something with purple, green, and mixed colors and everything else. And the teacher will say, that is not what I wanted. You see this guy, Johnny? He wrote exactly the way I wanted it. So the whole thing is the understanding that we want to teach. That person who made that purple and green and mixed it up and all kinds of stuff was right. But the teacher, okay, is saying it's not the flower that I wanted. See, so we have that problem when we, you know, when you do work with the Dao De Jing, okay, the same way, okay. It's got so many interpretations to it, okay, that if you say this is tell somebody this is incorrect or this is correct, you got to be careful, okay. You could dissect it, but the question is, who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong?
Thank you, Douglas, for those comments. I don't know if Jason, if you have anything that you want to say to that, but as far as right and wrong with the Tao.
I don't think they have the right or wrong.
Neither do I. That's not my interpretation. Thank you. Brian. Followed by Laura.
So I did think about this, the issue that Madeline was raising before I made my comments about teaching without words. And I think teaching it without words, in the way I interpreted it, makes sense of the concept of, I'm trying to find the words here, that Madeline was referencing. And I have so many different translations, it's hard for me to capture it word for word. But something without substance can pass through space between atoms, or for only absence can provide the place where everything belongs. There are different ways of saying this. But I take her point that the the knife is cutting, maybe it's more of a liquid, but watching is not a substance. It is less intrusive than these other things, just watching. And in the context of teaching, I don't know about other contexts, but in the context of teaching, that can cause a substance to reconstitute itself, reform itself. If, as Douglas has presented, and as the word teaching supposes, we're presenting the student or someone else is presented with a challenge, something new to incorporate into his or her being, something new to learn. And if you just watch the student interact with that challenge, then they will reconstitute themselves. And so in that way, by you setting the challenge and watching them while they do that, you participate in the reconstitution, the reforming of that seamless substance. It reforms itself. It reconstitutes itself. The student learns by interacting with that object, the challenge that is presented. And so that's more of to me is more of a Wu way. And the learning comes from the nature of the challenge. Let's say adding 2 and 2. Well, you can, they're probably struggle. You can find different words for it, but in the end, 2 and 2 always adds up to 4. And the student might try different things. They're going to try 5 and 3. And in the end, they're going to hit on 4, and all the other students are going to hit on 4. And it looks like 4 is the sum of 2 and 2. But on painting and something like that, with Douglas's example, yeah, each student does his or her own painting, and there is no right or wrong. And that's the nature of that challenge. That's the nature of that object. And the student has that learning objective, and the student has reconstituted himself or herself in interacting with that object. The interesting thing is, though, along the way, an interesting thing to me is that along the way, the teacher learns. The teacher can see a new way of painting flowers, or a new way of calculating 4, that sort of thing. So to me, that's how simply being present and watching is a way to penetrate the seamless.
Beautifully said. Wonderful comments. Thank you, Brian. Laura. Really appreciate those comments, Brian. You're muted, Laura.
Okay, I want to go back to the last line of the first paragraph. Hence, I know the value of non-action, and I would like to take that line and put it to the beginning of the second paragraph, so that now it reads, hence I know the value of non-action, teaching without words, performing without actions. So I think that in some ways changes, makes the meaning of the teaching without action and the second line, performing without actions, kind of explains what it means with the value of non-action. And so it simplifies those concepts in a certain way. What do you think? Like if the first paragraph ended with there is no space, and then the second one began with hence I know the value of non-action, teaching without words, performing without actions, few in the world can grasp it, then stop there. And then the third part would be that is the master's way. And then it would end like that. So it would be broken into 3 paragraphs. And then the interpretation of that part about the non-action and the teaching without words, performing without actions, I think would be understood, because he would just say, hence I know the value of non-action, and that would be the teaching without words, and the performing without actions would be the value of what non-action is.
Teaching without.
Jason's getting what I'm trying to say, right, Jason?
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it makes sense. It's logical.
Stoic.
So if you remember, you go back to the very first line, you talk about the softest can prevail over the hardest. Okay, so basic. So you see, that's the three themes that run out together. First, talk about the soft can overcome the hard, right?
Right.
Then talk about the no space, non-being can enter something being, right? Okay. Then certain talk about non-action can be better than action, or teaching without words is better. So I think that's the three things they talk about. Basically, it's negative overcome the positive. That's the way if you look at this way.
Right. And that's sort of what I was talking about, the positive and negative space kind of thing.
Yes, that makes a lot more sense now when you were talking about, and even Madeline's example of teaching with the idea of painting, you know, try and paint the space, not the object itself.
Right. Well, that's
Actually,
the positive and
that's an
negative
excellent
space
example of that.
That was positive and negative space that I had to run off because I had to, somebody was coming into my house and I had to see who it was because my little neighbor friend now walks into my house on his own. 9-year-old kid comes in my house all the time without knocking on the door. And sometimes my dog doesn't even care anymore because they're such good friends. So I often like jump out of my seat till I find out actually who has entered my house. Anyway, yeah, I was going to go on further. All right, well, now I've sort of explained my interpretation of this poem.
No, and it makes a lot more sense. It actually, I'm trying to think which one it was. I believe it was verse 11 that talked about the importance of emptiness and space as well. And it actually captures this whole concept very, very well. It's the one with the spokes on a wheel, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And that is a very, that is the same concept that's actually being communicated right here as well. Very well said. I have next up, sorry. I have, didn't see whose name, Kevin, forgive me.
It's a mention of general is like a Dao De Jing. It's lots of idiom. It's beautiful, like, you know, like we didn't systematically learn from school, even after school. However, you see, they forgot this chapter. The first two is the Liu Kegang. Basically, the soft can overcome the strong. Another one is 不言之教. Basically, we talk about a lot here is about education. We all the things. I'm gonna use Chinese first, then again try translate. It called 言传不如身教，身教不如简教. What's the things like you teach by words, not better than you just do yourself. Like I guess Nelson mentioned that the student learn from you. If you have good virtue, the teacher the student can follow you. If you have bad, let's see, behavior, doesn't matter how good you teach. Student cannot, you know, follow how good they are. Now the second is here didn't mention is teach. If let's you teach by the module, not better than by environment. Let's speak. Let's say my kids, let's say all students, the young kids play video game. You can hard to later are my kids, okay, focus on school, focus on the books, don't play the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I actually had a whole set of notes on number 11. I don't have them in front of me, but I just remember comparing it to how light and darkness and how in traditional philosophy, the idea of space kind of came into that, but I just don't recall exactly the example that I could use. Marco.
This is sort of like a little like on the abstract side, but I guess like when you're sort of anxious and it sort of feels like, you know, your emotions are mixed in with your thoughts. And so, you know, like your thoughts are very like concentrated and like hyper focused and sort of like, so I guess this is where like non-action comes into play, where, you know, just stopping from thinking and you know, just like taking a walk and or away from the situation, or yeah, just so you're creating some space in your head, and you know, something like that.
Oh yeah, thank you, Marco. It's this, yeah, it's I've always felt like the Dao, I agree with you, is it's like asking you to pause, and as opposed to take actions and to let things be. And I think that's what we kind of, I think that's all the comments we have for this verse. Let me just make one more. Yeah, Marco was the last one. So that took a little bit longer than we thought there, Jason. I know we were planning to cover 3 this evening. We'll see how long 44 takes us.
Probably the long one, then people got lost, so that's not much comment. And the short one, and then it's the essence is clear, so everybody got it. So it's a lot of.
So there were more comments. Yeah, yeah. It was a very good conversation. I enjoyed it immensely. So we'll move on to verse 44. So please type exclamation point in the chat if you like to read your version that spoke to you the most.
Yeah.
If not, I certainly can get us started. Mike. Thank you.
Yep, verse 44, it's from Wayne Dyer.
Okay.
Which means more to you, you or your renown? Which brings more to you, you or what you own? I say what you gain is more trouble than what you lose. Love is the fruit of sacrifice. Wealth is the fruit of generosity. A contented man is never disappointed. He who knows when to stop is preserved from peril. Only thus can you endure long.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. We have Evanique followed by Brian.
Okay, so verse 44, fame or self, which is most important? Your possessions or your person? Which is worth more to you? Gain or loss, which is worse? Therefore, to be obsessed with things is a great waste. The more you gain, the greater your loss. Be content with what you have been given. You can avoid disgrace. Knowing when to stop, you will avoid danger. That way you can live a long and happy life.
Thank you very much. And that was which version?
Oh, sorry, that is a Christian translation. God is nature, sees God, a Christian translation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Next we have Brian or Penny,
Okay.
followed by L.
Fame or integrity, which is more important? Money or happiness, which is more valuable? Success or failure, which is more destructive? If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you.
Stephen Mitchell. Thank you. Thank you very much, Penny. And so next up, we have L.
Oh, just a minute.
Oh, you gotta. I think you have a little bit of a microphone problem there.
Oh,
Yeah.
Joe, just a minute. Oh, gee.
Yeah. If not, I can read a version and then we can come back to you. Okay. I'll read the Ursula Le Guin version, the fame and fortune. Which is nearer, name or self? Which is dearer, self or wealth? Which gives more pain, loss or gain? All you grasp will be thrown away. All you hoard will be utterly lost. Contentment keeps disgrace away. Restraint keeps you out of danger. So you can go on for a long, long time. And that's the Ursula Le Guin version. Elle, if you've fixed your microphone, okay. Why don't we? We'll just go to Jason, and then we could circle back to you if you get things figured out on your end.
Yeah, you probably need to turn off. You probably use two machines, right? One phone, one thing, or you have the two things going on. You have
I don't
to.
see it. Normally that would be the case. I don't see anybody.
Okay, but anyway, let me share my screen. This one is another simple one, but a little bit different than most of the translation I did. First two lines are similar. Reputation or life, to which do you feel dearer? Okay, I think most translations do it the same way. Life or wealth, which do you want more? All right, that's very clear. And the third one I'm doing a little bit different. Gaining or loss, or gaining or losing, which do you worry about? I think the word being here, most of translation doing gaining or loss, losing, which one you bring more pain to you. But of course, gaining, but I think he's talking about here. You are worrying more, gaining something, or worrying more, losing something, right? Like you are investment. You worry more on making profit or worry about losing the money. Which one you worry more? I think that's the question he tried to get it. Okay, so that's the three questions. Okay, Lao Tzu is asking, right? The fame and your life. Which one is more close to you? Okay, your body and the wealth. Okay, the stuff. Which one you want more, right? You want to live longer or you want to have more money. Okay. The third one talk about which one you worry more. Okay, you losing something or you gaining something. Which one will bother you more? Okay, that's the three questions. That's what Lao Tzu is asking you. Okay, so therefore, unlimited desire leads to great spending. Okay, so and excessive holding leads to heavy loss. Okay, basically I do the words translation. Okay, I think most of translators doing the same thing. And here I make a little bit different. So if you pay attention on the Chinese word here on these two lines, you will see the word I said the first word. Okay, they are the same. They talk about knowing. And knowing something, then you will not, this one called bu, something will not happen. So I try to catch this kind of pair there. So I would, instead of using content, I use knowing what satisfies, you can avoid disgrace. Knowing what limits, you can avoid danger. Okay, so you know how much you want, you know how far you want to go. Okay, I think that's the way he's talking about. And this is the way to endure long. Okay, so that's the translation I make here. And this word, I think, is a little bit controversial. Okay, I think one of the translations talk about love, too much love or something. Actually, this word means love, that's true, but in the Chinese also means desire. Okay, so here I believe it means desire, not the love, especially not the Christian love. It talks about desire. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, desire would seem much more appropriate, and especially not as you mentioned, the West wouldn't make too much sense there. Okay, folks. Now type exclamation point in the chat for your takeaway on this particular verse. Does anybody have any takeaways? If not, we can come back to Jason. I mean, I think that this speaks to a little bit about values, the importance of values as well. That's what this particular verse spoke to me when I was looking at the Ursula Le Guin version. You know, which is nearer to name or self. You know, which is dearer, self or wealth. You know, what is it which gives more pain, loss or gain? And I think that you have to understand your core values in order to really make these kinds of judgments. And you'd mentioned the idea of actually knowing when to stop, Jason. That was an important point of this particular verse. If you don't know what your values are, you really don't know your limits and your boundaries as well. And that's a really important thing, because that allows you to determine how far you want to go with something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a very important point, and we've actually been talking quite a bit about boundaries and judgment and things along those lines and other meetups. So finally, it looks like we got some people that would like to share their takeaways. That's great. I think I have Laura first,
Okay.
and then followed by Douglas.
I found a different translation, and I'm starting to get a little confused about how far these can be from one another. This is one by the Lao Tzu, and it says, your name or your body, what is dear, your body or your wealth, what is worthier, gain or loss, what is worth, greed is costly, assembled fortunes are lost, those who are content suffer no disgrace, those who know those who know when to halt are unharmed, they last long. And that's this poem. And it seems so vastly different from Jason's translation. And I'm getting, sometimes I wonder, like, if we're in the same stratosphere in some of these, how can it be so different?
Are you sure that's different? I think it's very similar.
I think it's very similar as well. I was going to say something, if I were to interpret
No, I'm
that,
kidding.
maybe the words that are slightly different.
No, I know
but
it's very similar, but it's incredible though. Much more distinct.
This is actually a question that has come up in previous conversations, and maybe Jason, you could answer this a little bit better. One of the things is that when people are doing these translations, they're almost putting their perspective on it. It's not necessarily the literal translation, because I've even thought about this in terms of how we're experimenting with it now, that everybody has their version that they like that speaks to them, and that we're taking apart these different versions. But I think staying true to the words and then understanding the context of the time, that's why I appreciate your translations more than any other, because they actually bring a little bit more there. You're translating it word by word. So any thoughts on that in particular? Because I thought about this all throughout when we're studying.
Let me say, I think I told you, I studied, I wound up in a fourth semester Chaucer class when I was in college, all English majors, and I'm this little math major who never saw any of these things. And I was ready to leave that class in a minute. And the teacher said, no, why don't you stay? And I stayed, and I loved it. And my favorite part was translating from Middle English into current English. And the one thing I did was every word meant what it meant. There was no extra, because I was a math person and every word in math means one thing. And my teacher said I did the best translations of anyone in the class because I was true to the word. And I like being true to the word. I think that that's really, if we're going to do things in translating, we should be true to the word and leave our interpretations out outside the door, because, we blow it when we start to put, our interpretations into it. And, sometimes it's hard to accept the word for word, but you really have to do it.
How about this approach, Jason, in general?
Yeah, actually, I'm very happy to hear from Laura and Joe talk about. Actually, I have been talking about this kind of idea almost from the beginning, because I find out sometimes I feel jealous about others' translation because they use beautiful language, okay, and it sounds very convincing. But I work very hard to not doing this way, because the original text is not talking about this way. So a lot of time you see my translation is a little bit odd, a little bit different, but just like Laura said, I also have an engineering background. So I do the thing, try to stick with what is said. When there's a chapter 6, talk about female sexual organ. So you have to talk about the female sexual organ. You cannot just extension on, I think it's on the 55, if you go there, they talk about the male penis, okay? So you have to translate in the right way. You cannot say, okay, that means something, right? Just when you read Song of Song, they talk about breast, that's the breast. It's not something else. Talk about kiss, that's the kiss, right? So I think that's the way I try to do it. And I really appreciate a lot of people already get this idea. And I would say a little bit complain about the English translation, because this one is written in the ancient Chinese form, and which is not very clear, okay? And for 2,000 years, a lot of Chinese scholars reinterpret it in their own way. They don't stick with the original text. And the English translator, they read the interpreter, okay, of Chinese interpreter. So they add their own idea. So basically it's on the second, third level of interpretation. So sometimes it go very far away from the original meaning.
Yeah, it's very interesting in general, and I'll come to you in a moment, Douglas. Thank you for your patience. I too think about it when I look at your translations, and I think not only if we were to analyze that, but we would also analyze the context of the times as well, so that we would really get an understanding of what was going through people's minds at that particular moment in time. And then we would be able to maybe make some relationship to today in our own way versus reading somebody else's perspective on how this translation, or how they viewed the Tao and how it maybe helped them, because it becomes more of a I think almost self-help. I don't want to reduce it to that, but to a certain degree, where you're reading this and you're getting a lot of richness from it. And I don't mean to demean anyone's translations, but if you just want to dig into the text, that's why it's such a treat to have both you and Aman here. Even the little distinction but you just made between desire and love, explaining that is very, very important for us to understand, and how significant of a difference it actually would be if you had desire versus love, and why you put that in there, and what that might have meant back then.
Yeah, I just like to. Okay. Oh, sorry, Douglas. Give me about 30 seconds. So basically, I'm talking about I try to bring the people the same experience as reading Chinese to the group. So read the original Chinese. So you read it in Chinese and you think about how to use in your life. So that's the thing. For example, a lot of people like translate as emptiness, which in Chinese is called Kong, but that one is in the 6th century in the Buddhism teaching. But in the Dao De Jing, there's no single word called emptiness. Okay, there's no this word. Even they have the concept, but that's why I try to avoid. Okay, that's just one of the examples.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad we had this this little sidetrack conversation here. I think it's very important to have. Douglas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me put it this way. Interpretations if you're a writer, as you know, are going to be left to the personality that's reading that, the text, even if it's in Chinese. So we're going to have different interpretations, okay? They're not going to be, the same. Nobody's going to ever get down to exactly what was meant, okay? Now, I'm using some other sources, okay, I understand, but let me give you an idea. Ken Kais Jr., okay, I was a reporter. I got to see him a couple of weeks before he died. He wrote the Handbook to Higher Consciousness, and he wrote 12 Monkeys. And what he said to me, okay, compare thing. He said, I asked him, what's the most important thing? He said, unconditional love is definitely the most important thing, okay? Now go out and practice it. That was one thing. Now we learned that from reading this and get an idea that, hey, we could make a difference. We can go out and use it. What he was talking about and everything, that's great. And the person about mathematics, Bernarski said, mathematics is the closest thing to consciousness. So I'm looking at it from a little different perspective that most of you folks are today. But I don't have the book with me. But it's quite interesting, any of those areas. So if anyone want to pick on that, they can do that. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. I'm going to follow up with Mike. You're next.
Yes, so some of the verses of the Tao I have found over the years to be a series of caution lights. Just bear with me for a minute. Being raised a Roman Catholic, what I learned and it was 10 years worth. I found that it was more a series of red and green lights, like things I could definitely do and should do and things I definitely should not do. But I find verses like this and many in the Dao De Jing to be more yellow lights. Like they're not telling me what to do or what not to do. It's almost like there's a warning sign ahead. Like in here in the 44th verse, I see nothing but like boundaries, giving you an idea of like, don't do things to an excess. They're not saying don't do the actual thing, just be very careful about the excess. And I find it very practical in a post-COVID time, for example. Like I've learned a lot about being financially nimble going through COVID. I learned a lot about taking care of myself, my health-wise, post-COVID. So every time I read the Tao and more, I feel like it's not giving me hard parameters to work with. It's just like a series of caution lights. Watch out for being excessive. I'm not telling you not to do this thing. I'm just warning you about doing it too much. And again, going back to post-COVID, what's really important to us? Like how much are we starved, some of us, at least I am, for just human contact, right? Just the chance to shake somebody's hand or give somebody a hug. And so what's worth more to me? If I think about if I'm financially sound, but would I give some of that wealth away to be pre-COVID and have the ability to just interact with people like the past? So kind of I hope I'm making sense. It's just that
You are.
These parables or these verses, for me, they're never a dictum. They're never these rules to follow. It just seems like a series of caution lights that I take and I find very, very helpful in a self-help kind of way. It's like, here are the boundaries, you live within them and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, and the boundaries are nature, and what is our nature, and that's what it begs. That's the question that it's asking us, in my opinion. That what is, and then what there's a natural temperance, as you had mentioned, that kind of comes in with that, and that in this verse in particular, knowing when to stop, that exists and. Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's not something that is certainly not a prescriptive document where it's going to tell you this is exactly what to do. It's going to give you a framework for you to arrive at your own conclusions. And this verse in particular, I think, speaks to that. So thank you for those comments. They're great comments. I mean, and we can kind of come back to them in a way as well. Brian, you're next.
The yeah, I like the comment also just before that it's, and these are questions of degree and warnings. But I would say that to me, this verse is less vague, less ambiguous than many of the others. It's very clear that you want to give precedence to your body rather than your wealth. And you want to give precedence to yourself rather than your reputation. The last one, and I like Jason's translation. What do you worry? I don't know, I'm paraphrasing now. Maybe Jason could repeat it again, but my takeaway.
Which one you worry you more, right? Which one you gaining or loss? Which do you worry about?
Yeah, gain or loss, which do you worry about? This one's very interesting to me because that's not so clear as to the, I guess the obvious answer, the precedence. Your body takes precedence over wealth, I think, obviously, and you take precedence over your reputation, obviously. Gain does not necessarily take precedence over loss or loss over gain. So, but I think there's a hint in here that he says avoiding harm and enduring seem to be outcomes that should be preferred. So, and stability, I would add stability to that. So I think to answer this question, I think he would say, worry more about loss and don't worry about trying to gain. And that's that to me, that's kind of interesting because I think the American attitude is, wow, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Let's be adventurous. If you're not in the stock market, you're missing an opportunity, all this stuff. People are worried a lot about missing out on gains. And he's saying maybe also, obviously it's a complex topic, but be careful about your losses too.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, there are losses that turn into gains. I mean, that's another aspect of how we had a similar discussion about this when we were covering the Bible last week and the idea of rebirth. And so that, what does it mean to be reborn? You're forgetting something about the past. You're being reborn from something that you wish to discard. And one of the points that I brought up is that.
But I don't think he's preaching rebirth here. I think he's preaching endurance and avoiding harm. Right.
But loss can help that. That's my point. It's not a question of rebirth. I'm just saying loss can help that in certain ways. Actually, Jason, do you have any thoughts on this idea of loss and gain? I mean, because I don't want to misinterpret it, because I have thoughts, but.
Yeah, actually, I don't see there's anything like a misinterpret, So basically, just like Brian said, the first two questions is obvious. The third question is hard to answer. And I believe you are right. Lao Tzu's answer could be, you should worry about loss more than gain, right? That's very Eastern thinking. So right. More on the defense, prevention thinking. Then American or Western is more on the adventurous side. So I think that's, he didn't give us an answer, but by the following text, he talk about unlimited desire, excessive holding, basically talking about, I believe the answer would be worry about loss would be more important than worry about gaining more. So I think that's the message here.
Thank you. Actually, that clears up a lot for me. And I've even thinking about stoicism and our aversions to loss as well. Katie.
Yeah, I remember last week we were talking about how when you gain, you lose, and when you lose, you gain. So that for me, that seems kind of like in like contradiction with like which is more painful, or is it kind of like when you're gaining, you're still losing a little bit, or when you're losing, you're still like gaining? Is there like, because that doesn't seem to like line up with that. So I'm curious how those two passages line up.
Okay, let me answer by showing the last week's text. Okay, so that's the one, I think that's the one, chapter 42 we are talking about last week. Okay, so I think that Katie talked about probably, this sentence, okay? Probably talk about this sentence. Now talk about the things may appear. So remember, it's talk about appear gaining, okay? It may appear damaging. It may actually beneficial, okay? Something appear beneficial, but actually may be damaging. So it talk about appear, okay? So yeah, I think the Chinese word use 或, that means maybe, okay? Look like, okay? And then, so I think that's the difference. So to me, actually, I don't see that's a contradiction here, but you know, that's my interpretation. Yeah.
No, and I think that's excellent. Actually, that's a very good point. Let's see, do I have anybody in the queue? I don't. Now, it's currently 10:40. If there aren't any other, we could go on a little bit more about this. And I think that there are things that we could also talk about with detachment or holding on to things as well. But before we go down that road, Jason, do you think we're going to have time for 45 this evening or no?
Probably not. Because 45 a little bit long, okay, and then 45. I think 45 is a little bit long. You know?
Okay.
Compared to others, a little bit long. Probably was a while to a little bit more discussing. You know, so that's I'm thinking. You know, so. I before we start, when I talked to Shrinkan about the two three, I talk about like we probably will spend only 1 hour. We'll finish the first two section, and the rest hour we talk about 45. But turn out we spend the whole hour on 43, right?
Yeah, and we're already 40 minutes into 44, yeah. and we could easily go on with this as well. Kevin.
This session felt like a bigger breakout room generally than what we, you know, and it went pretty well to have this large discussion rather than question and answer.
Yes.
I would say, I don't know if you want to vote on that for, you know, to discuss with Show.
Well, we'll bring it up. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. For me, you know, this is beautiful, obviously. Sort of everybody got the meaning.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm actually having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now better?
It's okay. I can hear you. It's just it's a little faint. There we go. There we go.
Let's see. Better? No.
Yeah, yes. Much better. Much better.
Much better. Okay. Better still?
It's okay. Yeah, it's good enough.
Okay. For me, it's, you know, this I've noticed you guys I learn from you everyone to actually the third question is tricky. Normally this is why the and the law gain and loss have something, you know, comparison. Also, you know, why the has some withdraw. Normally we consider gain is better, right? Normally I'm going to switch my earset.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Much better.
Very weird. When I put it now, how about now? Better?
Much better. Much better.
Okay. I know. I switched. Okay, I'm use this. Basically, what that third question? Yes, this is like if you consider like we learn each other from cultural perspective. That's awesome from our, let's see, modern culture. We learn from this. Normally we consider fame, wealthy, gain, all beautiful words. So however, what's the drawback? Anything disadvantage or something we need to rethink it? Here's give some medicine like, okay, we want a Chinese word called 知足常乐. Know that enough, then you're always happy. So that's here's like 知足不如 and avoid the basically by the way, I mean thank you Jason for sharing the translation, kind of handy read. It's basically see, avoid the disgrace, danger, then endure long. That's how long, how come. I'm not sure you guys, when you read it though, it's so calm. Our feeling like our mind like in meditation, in the yoga mode. You see, you think world not like wealthy cannot bring you the housey, and fame cannot bring you housey. So that's why to consider when you think it got big, don't forget you more wealthy, more baggage, like luggage. How can you consume it? It's also headache. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Great points. I mean, and there is the, as I mentioned, the idea of detachment. And I think that there's another aspect of that I actually thought about while reading this, is the attachment to externals versus, looking for happiness internally. That if you're attaching yourself to things and you're unable to let go of things, Marco, then you're a lot less happy. You're dependent on externals to give you something, versus actually something that can come from within. I can go into greater detail about that, but I'll let Marco go first.
No, it was just reminded me of something I was reading over the weekend, like a quote that said, like, when you're making a decision, like not striving for brilliance, but you want to like avoid stupidity. So I guess like aiming for the things that you want to avoid. Aiming for the thing that you want to avoid.
Thank you, Marco. And next I have Kevin.
First, thank you. Just now you bring the born. I would say here is like we also have one idiom called 身外之物. Basically, wealth, fame, all outside your house. It's nonsense. If your house, you can have fame, you can have your wealth. So that's reborn from the Taoist or the Tao practitioner. Normally, it's like you said, reborn every day. It's all, if they live fresh. So not, let's say, next day, I'm going to fresh my mind, like you look at their facial feeling, they are happy. It's like Buddha, some monk, you see that's kind of so relaxed. You kind of naturally live close with nature. Like normally, if we is working or have business or is some so exhausted every day, every minute calculated until your house get bad, or one day you still go the same thing. If where you come, where you go, how are you born, how are you going to die? Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Jason, do you have any final comments that you would like to make? Actually, we're getting close to.
No, great. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think these two chapter message, at least I think is clear, and then that's good. Yeah. And
yeah, I mean, it really,
complicated. Yeah, I think.
it wasn't complicated, but it made the conversation really rich. It really did. You know, that, and I mean, I still wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of how this active versus passive way of achieving happiness, whether loss or gain is more, you know, what gives us more pain, loss or gain, and just this idea, if you're dependent on an external thing for your own personal happiness, if this makes sense, then you're probably going to only look to the idea of gain as something that you're just going to make you happy, versus the idea where you could possibly see loss as a gain, is something where I think that you're not necessarily attached to things, to externals, and that your happiness is coming from somewhere else. And if your happiness is, well, I'll leave it at that for now. Douglas, because I do want to try and close out by 11 o'clock.
I just want to say, this was terrific. Thank you. But I want to tell you, I was a military hero, okay? And I got the book when I was in the military. And then I became a champion poker player, okay? And one of the pioneers of the Las Vegas scene. Then I became, a doctor, I got my doctorate and everything. But the whole thing is, I remembered one thing, and I became, an expert, honored me and stuff. I remember one thing. The whole thing is humility. This book teaches humility, and it teaches one how to act in the world. Okay, it really had a real whole thing on me, and it was just a great. The book it tells you how to really be. You can meditate on this book. It's just such a fantastic book, type of thing. And I just thought I'd mention that, but taught me how to be humble, how to have humility, how to have a good sense. There's a lot of things in that book.
Yes, I completely agree. You should have been there for the one we did on extremes, the idea of not living to extremes, and whether humility was actually the wrong end of the spectrum, whether that was an extreme or not. We got into a little bit of conversation about that. That was a really interesting conversation. It was kind of, we got into Aristotelian golden mean type of logic, and then incorporated that into the Tao. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to make some quick announcements. Tomorrow, we'll be covering Dante's Commedia and on our Comprehensivist Wednesdays. That'll be in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, and that is being hosted by CJ and Shrikant. For those of you that have read Dante, obviously it would really be wonderful if you could make that. But even if you hadn't, I've looked at the essay that CJ has written, and he's really made it accessible for everybody. So if you just want to attend, please do. And that's tomorrow night. Then we have the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 16 through 36. For God so loved the world. And that is on Thursday. That has actually been a really interesting meetup. I must admit I'm a little bit resistant to it initially, but I was, there are parts of it that I'm really, really enjoying, and specifically applying some philosophy to the Bible. And Friday is a very, very important meetup. It's the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. and that is being led by Srikant. Srikant is actually going through and translating the entire Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit. Yeah, it actually it's really, it's off to an amazing start. So I really encourage you to attend that. It's exposing me to things that I haven't thought about in the past. So and I think that's really the point of 52 Living Ideas, is to give us insights into and exposure to things that we've never seen before. So I really highly encourage that. That is the most challenging meetup Srikant has tried to pull off yet, because he feels like the distance between the text and what everybody's used to reading is there's a huge distance between the two, but he's trying to bridge that gap. So anyway, so thank you, everybody. I appreciated everybody's comments. I really had a good time tonight. I always do. Jason, thank you as always. And we're going to have Aman back next week. So we'll have to let him know that we made it without him. So he might be surprised. Yeah. And thanks, Brian, for your comments. I really enjoyed them this evening. Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Everybody have a
Thank
great
you.
evening. Take
Thank
care.
you, Joe.
Bye.
Good
Thank
Bye.
you. Good night.
night,
This
everyone.
is the best night of the week for me.